Well, good day to you all. I'm John Lyle. Welcome to the August 1st Sunday program for the Nottoway Valley Historical Museum. Obviously, we'd all rather be in the big room at the museum rather than doing this on video, but that's not the case these days. This is what we have to do. Today, our title of our discussion, as you can see here, is the recent discoveries on human history. There have been some amazing things found in the last 30 years and in the last 10 years that have really cast some very interesting light on our background. By our, I mean us as Homo sapiens. Now, I do want to make this very clear right up front, and that is that if you prefer the Old Testament version of how we all got here, right now there's 7.4 billion of us on this earth. If you prefer the Old Testament version, that's fine. That's just fine. America's a free country. You can believe and you can espouse whatever your beliefs are. But I urge you to take a look, because there have been some amazing things found. Certainly some fossils, some pre-Homo sapien fossils, and also some very interesting things that have been discovered in DNA that help us understand, frankly, our own evolution. One of the first questions you might have is, why is John Lyle, a business school guy, talking about anthropology? And just tell you right up front that I make no academic claims to this. I'm just a very interested amateur. Some of you may know that Julie and I spend some time in the winter in Arizona, in Phoenix area. And by coincidence, Dr. Donald Johanson, the famous paleoanthropologist, is on the faculty of Arizona State University and often puts on programs on this very subject. Dr. Johanson is the one who he and his team discovered the famous fossil of Lucy, which we'll get into a little bit later on, much more detail. So again, I'm just an interested amateur, not a professional. Okay, let's get started with this. First of all, this big valley here you see, we're going to find out later on, this is the reason a number of these fossils of our predecessors have been found, and we're going to get more into that. Let's move on. This is a quote from Charles Darwin in 1858. In other words, just prior to our own Civil War. And he said, "In the distant future, light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history." Now, Darwin is often heavily misquoted. He did not say man descended from the apes. He did not say that. But he also did say, further, that Africa will probably be the place where fossils will be found. There were no fossils at that time. He was just predicting that because our closest living ancestors, or hominids, are the chimpanzee and the bonobo, which of course live in Africa. So let's get started with looking at some specific things that have been discovered. This poor creature here is 6.8 million years old. His or her nickname is Tormai. Tormai was found in Chad in Central Africa, which is just below the Saharan desert. It's misshapen and broken up like this because it was in sandstone, which shifted quite a bit as this skull was being fossilized. But so you say, well, what in the world can you tell from this kind of messed up specimen. Well, what we can tell is that this is probably, most probably not an ape. And you say, well, how do you know that? There's two big reasons. One of them is the teeth. Toromai does not have the big fangs that the chimpanzee and others do. Here's the chimpanzee skull, and you can see these two big canine fangs that they actually self-sharpen as they open and close. That's common in chimpanzee, bonobos, gorillas. It was how they evolved. Those are fighting teeth. If you would introduce a strange chimpanzee into a group of chimpanzees, they would kill it very quickly. And again, you can see how. Well, coming back to Toromai, he or she does not have the ape teeth. Now the other thing that's very tip-off is they call the foramen magnum. That's where the spinal cord goes into the skull. And here it is on a chimpanzee. And it's that way because the chimp walks down on all fours on knuckles, and it's got to get its head up to see. It's hard for us to do because our foramen magnum is more like this. It's back in the center. We're going to talk a little more about Lucy, but you can see her foramen magnum is much further forward than a chimpanzee because Lucy walked reasonably upright. And Toromai has a foramen magnum about like this. So those are the two reasons that anthropologists say that that discovery was not an ape. Also, the other thing you can draw the conclusion is Toromai was probably bipedal, meaning walked on two legs. Didn't knuckle walk on four like a chimpanzee. And one of the tip-offs, again, is where this foramen magnum is. If you're walking upright and leaning slightly forward, like Toromai did, this is where your foramen magnum will be. Years ago, when I first getting started with anything to do with anthropology, they thought at that time that the enlarged brain that we have and the bipedalism, walking on two legs, would happen at the same time. And that's not the case. Bipedalism happened way early in the separation of us from our common ancestors. But our brain size in a chimpanzee is about 350 cc's, cubic centimeters. Lucy is about the same, Toromai is about the same, not much different. Here we are at 1,350 or 1,400 cc's. Quite a difference. So the brain size was changed much later. All right, now you might ask, why are these fossils found, so many of them? Here's where they've been found. In Ethiopia, the Horn of Africa, and then some down here in South Africa. And here's where Toromai was found in Chad. You might ask, well, why in the world are all these fossils being found there? And it's a kind of an interesting answer. It's that first slide you saw, that big valley. Well, here's what's happening. You got tectonic plate movement, continental plate movement. This is called the Somalian plate, and it's moving this direction. Here's the African plate, it is moving that direction. And here's the Arabian plate, and it's moving that direction. So those three are moving away from this area and literally pulling the Earth apart. That area moves about this much each year. And so it's ripped open the surface of the Earth there and has laid these giant valleys. Well, when you get down toward the bottom here, now you're down into really old rock. Fossils are predominantly found in sedimentary rock. And the bottom bottom layers here are where some of the oldest things are found. It's because Africa is literally pulling apart in this area and exposing a lot of old rock that is then eroded during the rainy season, and it exposes these fossils, which we're going to see more of. This is called an area, let me move back. This area right in here is called the Afar Triangle because the Afar River runs through here. It's also, this whole area is called the Great Rift Valley because the earth is a big rift pulled apart right there. Another thing that you might ask is, what drives creatures to evolve? And the main driver is the change in climate. When climate changes, it changes the food supply, it changes the environment, and the creatures that can adapt and evolve to those changes, those are the ones that survive and continue. But this chart is from the NSA, our National Aeronautic and Space Administration. This is what we have found from a number of cores taken in the last 800,000 years about what the temperature on the average temperature on Earth has been. And this is plus 1 degree centigrade. So you can see this has moved up and down. There it's down here about -4 degrees, which is, it's roughly 9 degrees Fahrenheit. And then it goes back up, and you can see what happens. Big changes in a short time. Here now we're down to -5 Celsius. Then it's shot clear back up to almost 0 change. And you can see that has gone on. This one in the Holstein period of time went clear up positive about 1 degree, not quite, about ½ degree. And then you can see these changes that have gone on. Another hot time happened about, 1.1 million years ago, or it'd be 1.1 thousand years. And then it's charted down to, this is called the last ice age. Now that happened in about 1400 to 1700. The end of the American Revolution was about this time, the end of it. And then it's gone back up here, and right at this point, it's about the same as the 0. Not that much change at this point. But what that does is changes the plants. And plants are food. Plants are also shelter. Plants are the difference between trees and grass. And so the climate change has really affected our ancestors' evolution. Okay, now let's move up to kind of one of the more recent discoveries. Very interesting creature. This was found by Dr. Tim White and his team. Dr. White is on the faculty at University of California, Berkeley. He was also part of the team that found Lucy's skeleton. Now, this is Ardi. It stands for Ardipithecus. The nickname is Ardi. Ardi's skeleton was female, the first one that was found, and she was 4.3 million years old. She had small canines, didn't have the big fangs of the apes, and since she was found, there have been 103 different individuals, parts of them discovered. Now, the other thing you can note is her brain size is not much different. It's about 3.5, 3.6 cubic centimeters. But the shocking thing, the thing that really hit the news was, and you can see down here, Ardi had an opposable big toe. Opposable meaning like your thumb can oppose your fist. So Ardi had evolved quite a bit, but she still had this opposable toe. Now it's not a flexible foot like a chimpanzee. but it does have an opposable toe, meaning she was still reasonably showing signs of being able to operate well in trees. Now, the area she lived in looks like this, mainly large tropical plants, smaller trees. But this is where Artie was found. Now, since then, it has gone back to 5.8 million years. This same species has been discovered, again in Africa. Actually, her brain size is up a little bit. It's about 375 cc's. So Artie was found originally in 1994, and some older ones of that same species were found just 2 years ago in Ethiopia. Okay, the next one we'll look at. This fellow here is Dr. Raymond, this guy, not this guy. That's Dr. Raymond Dart. He was an anatomist in South Africa at Witwatersrand University, and he had heard about fossil ape-like creatures being found in a local quarry, and he said something to the foreman that he would like to see those sometime. Suddenly one day a big crate shows up on his front doorstep, big wooden crate, and it had fossils in it, and this little guy here, this skull, was sitting right on top. Now this skull has come to be called the Tong child, mainly because that's the area. And when you find a new species, you get to name it, and typically they use Greek meaning words to name them. And he named this species, and there's many others now that have this name, Australopithecus. And what that means is southern ape-like man. And this is a child that is small, but very well preserved. But again, no fangs, and the foramen magnum is much more forward. So that Dr. Dart found this. He said right away, this is not an ape. And he got some ridicule by people who said that it was. But again, he pointed out the difference. And he knew there was difference. And that's why he named it Australopithecus. All right, we'll move on to probably one of the most famous creatures found. This was found in just 1974. And you heard me mention that Dr. Johansen was the one that found this creature, a female. This was found in the Hadar part of Ethiopia. And I mentioned too that Tim White and then a Frenchman named Ives Copeland helped with this. But while they were cleaning up the skeleton, this is what the creature looked like when it was whole. Here's what the skeleton looked like. The lighter areas are the bones actually found. And this skeleton was almost 40% complete, which was really remarkable. When they were cleaning up this at night under these tents with bright lights where they could get rid of the sandstone and other attaching things, somebody had a tape player that was playing, in 1974, and it kept repeating on the Beatles song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And someone said, well, let's just name her Lucy. And it stuck. That's the reason this creature is famous. Now, I'm going to move on here to show you the difference in legs. One thing I want to talk about here, see the humerus, that's this upper arm bone. It is long. It is longer than the femur. Now on us, our humerus is from here to here. It's much shorter than what our femur is. But this is part of the evolutionary process. And she had big clinging fingers. But let's talk about feet here, or legs just a little bit. Here is the chimpanzee, And you can see the leg runs straight up and down from the hip. That's why chimpanzees walk like this. They go from side to side because the foot stays out to the side. It does not have this bend in the leg. It puts the foot more in the center, and here even more in modern man. That's why we are able to walk in a straight line and not move back and forth, because we've got this indentation in our knee, just like this is Lucy, this is modern man. See how long that femur is now? Anyway, that's the difference, one of the big differences between apes and men. This is an amazing thing here. This is, what a coincidence. These are footprints that appeared in some what's called volcanic tuff. It's almost like cement when it dries. It had a smaller creature walking out here, person rather, and a larger one here, but then another larger one didn't want to get its feet in this stuff, apparently, because it walked in the same footstep. That's why it kind of messed it up. So 3 creatures walked along there, and it probably looked something like this. Now we do know there's the volcano that deposited this white stuff all over. We do know that there was quite a bit of what's called dimorphism, the difference in size between male and female, almost 30% difference. In modern man, it's like 8%. But this is the Australopithecus afarensis, meaning it was found near the Fr River. This is an older version of an elephant, Stegosaurus. Anyway, now you can see what happened. Well, this went on for 90 feet, this footprint thing, and it was discovered by Mary Leakey, who you'll hear more about. She and her husband made a lot of very interesting discoveries. But while we're on this, before we go any further, let's look at the skull of Lucy. Now this is a, let me go to another thing so it's a little clearer. There we go. This is a skull of Lucy. It's a reproduction, obviously. But you see how much forward her face is? That was typical of Australopithecus. Our face is fairly flat, these people's face, but you don't see the big fangs. And where's the foramen magnum? It's right there. It's here. It's not at the back like an ape. But the other thing that sticks out a lot is how small that brain case is. That brain case, even on the outside, is less than the size of a softball. It's about 370 cc's. So that's about what Lucy's skull looked like. It's big, it's wide, because they had big chewing muscles attached here for chewing up a lot of plants. These people mainly lived on plants. That's Lucy, and that's her small brain. That's what she looked like. Now we'll go on to some others here. Get Lucy secured. Let's go on here. There's a picture of Dr. Johansen, and this, of course, is the part of Lucy's skull that was complete. Okay, then we've seen the footprints. Now, this is the lady who discovered the footprints. This is Mary Leakey. This is her husband, Louis Leakey. He was famous for starting to find hominid skeletons in what's called the Olduvai Gorge. It's that same Rift Valley, it's just south into Kenya. And they found a creature, they found many, but the one they're holding here is Homo habilis, and that stood for handyman. And they named it that way because around this creature's skeleton there were a lot of stone tools found. Now this Homo habilis had maybe twice the brain size as Lucy, at 700 cc's. And there's the foramen magnum. It's at the back of underneath the skull, because it had to hold up this melon. Anyhow, that's the two folks. Here's what an interesting thing. Homo habilis probably was this is part of the valley, the Olduvai Gorge, and it was down toward the bottom of this layer in here, where they found this creature about 2.5 million years ago was when that creature was around. Lucy was about 3.4 million years ago, so it was just a full million years later. But this is what Homo habilis probably looked like somewhat when you just get away from the skeleton. But you can see the upper part of the head's beginning to get bigger. And had enormous ears. These are some of the tools that were found in the Olduvai Gorge in the same level as Homo habilis. And that's where the handyman name came from. Now, Homo habilis probably was the first of our predecessors to be able to save and use fire. Typically it was started with a lightning strike, but then they learned to save embers and learned how to use fire. It's evident because there's some hearth and ash at the level of Homo habilis, which is found. The next one we're going to talk about is 1.8 million years ago, and this is called Homo erectus because he walked fully upright. There was no leaning forward with his face or his skull, and he was growing, his brain was getting bigger. He's up to 900 cc's. This was the first creature, first ancestor to leave Africa. Some of the Homo erectus skeletons and remains have been found even as far away as Java in Indonesia. And it was also found in China, in Georgia, a division of Russia, and it was found in a number of places. And it had a fairly long existence. Even was found in Saudi Arabia, believe it or not. That area had lakes in it. Now let's talk about that just for a minute. You know, if a creature is going to become a fossil, it can't just plop down in the desert or somewhere, or in the jungle even, because hyenas, jackals, vultures would tear it apart. But if it's around a lake environment or water or stream, then if it dies and it gets pulled into, pushed into, buried into mud, then it's protected. It'll stay together. Other creatures can't tear it apart. And that's why in the areas where these creatures are found, the small freshwater snails, just like we have today, are found, telling us that, among other reasons, that was in a lake environment. But we'll move on here. This is Homo heidelbergus, called that because he was discovered. He's about 1.3 million years ago, he and she. Now we're getting to a brain size of up to 1,100 cc's. See the taller forehead? That's where the cognitive part of the brain grows, the part that lets us think. Homo heidelbergus was discovered near Heidelberg, Germany. He and she are the ancestor to both us, Homo sapien, and to the Neanderthal. They were the predecessor. But again, they left Africa and found their way all over Europe, all over most of Europe and Asia. Again, this is the common ancestor to the Neanderthal and to us. So let's move on here. This is a kind of a representation of the Neanderthal. They were first found in Neander Valley, Germany. That's where the name comes from. Neanderthal was very robust, big muscled, big boned, big nose, because they lived in a cold climate and they had to breathe a lot of cold air. They had a robust body. Their brain size is actually slightly bigger than ours. They were about 1,600 cc's, but their brain is long, not tall. And we'll talk about that a little more. This is a depiction of a Neanderthal woman. Now, of the ones that have been found, there's been everything from people of light skin, blonde-haired, to darker skin, darker-haired versions of the Neanderthal. Now, again, you see the big nasal cavity. The other thing that's interesting here is that all of us that are from Northern Europe, by that I mean England, France, Italy, so forth, Germany, there was intermarriage, interbreeding between Neanderthal and Homo sapiens, because we existed for about the same time. The Neanderthal first showed up about 400,000 years ago. Modern man showed up about 200,000 years ago. These folks disappeared about 40,000 years ago. Of course, we're still here. But there was interbreeding, because those of us who are from Northern Europe, this was just discovered when we broke down the human genome, that all of us carry about 2.5% Neander DNA. It's easy to find when you have the right equipment. If you go to southern Africa, people who are not influenced by Europe, you'll find no Neanderthal DNA. But we definitely carry some of that DNA in our own bloodstream. So here we are. I really like this picture. This is us. This is Homo sapien, which stands for wise man. I guess if you get to name yourself, why you're going to be favorable, and they call us wise people. There's 7.4 billion of us on this planet. We arose about 300,000 years ago in Africa and left Africa about 60,000 years ago. We competed with the Neanderthal for food, etc. One of the main differences is, though, this big cognitive brain here. We could communicate with one another, we had language, we could organize hunts. There's lots of things that we could do, and still can. Put man on the moon, for example. Though we outcompeted the Neanderthal, who went extinct about 40,000 years ago. So I want to show you this chart. I realize I'm going to have to tell you what it says. Here's Tormai, or really it's Sahelanthropus. That's Tormai down here, and this Tormai lived for this period of time, from not quite 7 million years ago up here to just short of 6 million. Here's where the common ancestor probably will be found between us and the chimpanzee. Chimpanzees went on to evolve their own way, the short back, the stiff wrists, the big teeth, so forth. We went the other direction. Well, there's Tormai. We talked about him and her. Here's the Ardipithecus. This is, remember Ardi? Well, Ardi lived from about 5.8 all the way up here to about 4.3 million years ago. And Ardi had a long period of time. Here's the first Australopithecus, and that was right in here about 4.3 million years ago. Again, you see at one time there was more than one species. There's several that existed at the same time. Well, here's Lucy, that's her picture. Lucy's people lived from about 3.8 up to about 2.8, about 1 million years. That was Australopithecus africanus. That's where we are. Here's Lucy, here's Africanus, so it's just a little bit later. Here's Homo habilis. Remember us talking about having the tools, the handyman they called him or her? They had a long run, about 1 million years. Here's the Homo ergaster. This one had a huge span of time, about 1.5 million years. This was Java man. It was a bunch of people, but they moved out of Africa and began to populate the world. This is kind of what they look like. Here's the Homo heidelbergus. We talked about him and her. They were the predecessor to the Neanderthal, which is here, and to us. You see that little bitty dot up there? That's how long we've been here. We haven't been here very long compared to these other species. But that is a pretty good evolutionary chart. But notice that many times there was more than one species existing at the same time. There isn't a single tree. It's more like a bush in our background. So let's look at this chart too. I think you'll enjoy this. Here we're down here with Tormai, and there's the brain size. There's Africanus. It gets better. You can see they're going, this chart here shows it in a lineal fashion. Here's Homo habilis, handyman, Homo erectus, we talked about that. This is a Neanderthal. See how long that skull is compared to ours? They actually had a slightly larger size, but the cognitive area is not nearly as big as ours. So you see, we get up in here to about Homo sapiens sapiens, that's us. We're about 1,400 cc's. Down here, this was about 900. Anyhow, you see how the brain size and the shape of the face has grown. See how this is face forward? Whereas you get out here, our face is flat. This is a representation starting with Tormai, moving into Ardi, that's Lucy, Homo habilis, so forth. This is Homo rudolphus, and this is Heidelberg, or this is actually a Neanderthal, this is Heidelbergus. But it just shows you how the face has changed over about 6 million years. Now we're back to Darwin. I always got a kick out of this picture. I always thought he looked like one of the Smith brothers, if you remember Smith Brothers cough drops. But he had a very interesting thing to say. This guy had difficulty expressing his beliefs because he lived in Victorian England and he knew he'd be ridiculed a lot. And his wife didn't care for some of his beliefs either, so he was kind of reticent about talking about it. But here's the big point that he made, if you remember nothing else, this is it. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, not the most intelligent. It is the one that is the most adaptable to change. And that's been us. We are the ones that have adapted and changed the most. We're the end of that chain, let's say it that way. So here we are. This family by a seashore. There's about, like I said, 7.4 billion of us. And we are the surviving species. Well, that's it for the program. Now, it's hard to handle questions in this situation, but if you do have questions, the website of the museum is one word. It says Page County History. That's one word, at yahoo.com. Send your questions in and we will get them answered for you. Hopefully someday we'll be able to get back together, probably after vaccine, and these first Sunday programs can be handled like we're used to. I will talk about one question that we've had when showing this presentation, is people ask, are we continuing to evolve? And the answer is yes, and there's a very interesting example I can give. Like most everybody seeing this presentation is of Northern European descent. And the Northern European folks, got along well and shepherded and herded the big dairy cattle. They ate the meat, but more important, they drank milk. They used milk byproducts, meat or cheese, etc. And because of that, they developed an enzyme that would let them digest dairy products. Dairy products have a sugar in it called lactose. Anytime you hear something with OSE on the end, it's usually a sugar. But lactose, when we're born, we have the enzyme that lets us drink mother's milk, obviously. But typically, in most parts of the world, we lose that ability within a couple of years of being weaned from our mother, which gets us about 5 or 6 years old. Somewhere after that, we're no longer able to drink milk because we can't digest lactose. You can drink it, but you get sick. Well, those of us from Northern Europe, we still have that clear to very late in life. That's because we developed that enzyme. It evolved that way. To speak personally, our mother liked ice cream, drank milk, so forth, all of her life until she got to be about 88 years old, and at that point she began to have difficulty with anything with lactose in it. So we had to go to lactose-free ice cream and lactose-free milk. But that is an example of our evolving, recent evolving. Anyway, that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, if you have questions, send an email to the museum, and we'll hopefully get you answered. Thank you.